Hey guys, wanted to bring to you today this video on how to compare your knives one with another. So you would be carrying, you got this Boker in your collection and you got a Schrade and you're like, hey, I wonder how the Schrade kind of measures up. And so it's just a fun little thing we do as collectors is we just can't help ourselves to look at two knives and compare them. And so I got a little system for doing that. And the reason I made a system is we have our own little biases. And in this comparison, I think a lot of guys would say this is a Boker Soligen knife. It's a really nice knife. Both of these are traditional whittlers. You can see that right there. Both of them. Anyhow, so you would expect this knife to just slam the Schrade knife. But in an objective comparison, that doesn't really happen. And I think this video will kind of surprise you. So the first rule, I established some ground rules before I play this game. And all games have rules, right? So one of the rules is you should compare knives that are comparable, right? So two whittlers. Whittlers are premium knives. If you try to compare this whittler with another really well made single blade or two blade jack, the whittler's going to win. The whittlers are premium knives that were made to very high quality levels. So when you're doing comparisons, if you can, you want to have the same pattern that you're comparing. Sometimes that's just not possible, and comparing one knife to another can tell you a little bit about maybe you're wondering what company made a better knife, for instance, or did they make a better knife in the 1940s than they did in the 1970s. And so you can get a little bit of a comparison off of that, but it works a lot better if you choose two knives that are as close as you can get them. The other rule is they should be from the same era, and that's for the reason I just mentioned. So pre-1945 knives are the best knives ever made, and you're trying to compare it to a knife made in 1970, which may be a good knife, but it's not going to compare very favorably with the older knife. And so you want to try to even that playing field the best that you can before you start comparing your knives. And so I'm just going to show you, this is a little simple test that I created because I realized early on I was being biased in my comparison. So this is an attempt to get the biases out of my comparisons. And so first thing I look at is appearance, then the materials, the function, the build quality, and the finish quality. And each one of these I assign just a single point. It's a very simple system. And so the loser gets a point, and the one that has the least points at the end wins the game. And so you look at appearance. If there's a winner, the loser gets a point. The loser gets a point. The loser gets a point, and maybe the winner has a point here and a point here. So by 2 to 3 margin, the one knife would win the contest and be the better knife. And this takes subjectivity out of it. And this is really simple. You can make it as complicated as you want. So you could put bullet points underneath materials to add points to your system to make it more reliable, or maybe you just want it to be a little more in depth than what I have here. That's fine. So I'm going to go through and show you how that works real quick. And so when you look at this Schrade, it's a whittler, traditional whittler. It has a prop wood handle. I think it's attractive. I think it's a good looking knife. And so the appearance overall is pretty good, I'd say. And the reason that's important is there's some ugly knives out there. And if a knife isn't attractive, somebody's not going to use it. So it is an important feature. If you look at this Boker, you've got a rosewood scale on it, a nice gold medallion there. It looks pretty good. I have not cleaned this knife up, by the way, so it's not quite as shiny as the Schrade, but I think it would have been shiny brand new, and I think it was mirror polish brand new. I just haven't cleaned it up yet. So in this case, you could have a preference, and if you'll notice, the cover pins on this knife are button pinned, and so there's a little like button sitting up at the top. They're not button spun, which is kind of like a mushroom. These are like little buttons. You see it a lot on German knives, but if you look at that knife like that, you see how it sits up, and so I don't really like that look. And it's also like you feel it with your hands, so I don't like it. The Schrade has nice smooth pins, and so overall, I would give the Schrade the upper hand on this, even though I think the genuine rosewood looks a lot better than the prop wood does. But I really don't like that, and so this is kind of subjective. If you like this look, maybe you would grade it differently, but I give a point here, and so the Boker is losing already. And so we'll go on to materials, and here you have carbon steel, brass, nickel, silver, and the scales here are rosewood, a genuine hardwood, and you have nickel silver pins. On the Schrade, you have prop wood, which could be and doesn't look to be a hardwood. You don't really need a hardwood when you use prop wood because it's resin impregnated, and you'll notice it's brass pins. So in this case, you have to give the material advantage to the Boker. It's just better materials. Okay, that rosewood, even though the prop wood would probably last longer than this rosewood, it is a premium upgrade. This is a less expensive option for the maker. And also the nickel silver is an upgrade over the brass pins. So in this case, the Schrade gets a point. So right now, these guys are even. So then you look at the function of the knife, and to me that includes things like, you see how those nail nicks line up? So they're both accessible. Easily you can get to them. And that's important because on some knives, that's not really the case. And so that's part of my evaluation of a knife and its function. Can you use a knife, easily? And if you open the knife up, you're talking about the pull of a knife. Guys put a grading scale of 1 to 10 on that, and 10 being the hardest. And this is about a 7. It's a little tight opening this up, a little tighter than normal. But it's an older knife, and it may have been crimped here, and maybe that's the reason why. So it's fine, right? It's just a little more difficult. So it snaps open. The next test I do is press it like that, and it shouldn't just pop in, right? You want resistance there. That's the way a knife should be made, and so it has a resistance. And then on closing, as you close a knife, you push it, and it should close on its own, and it does that. So this knife functioned perfectly, and every blade on it does. And so it's a little stiffer than I really like, but it's fine. The function on this knife is fine. When you look at the Schrade, more of the same. The nail nicks are in good positions. No problem accessing them, so that's working. When you open this knife up, it's smooth, just like the Boker was. It's a lot lighter though, so this is about a 6, I'd say. And you do your little test here. same thing. You know, a lot of resistance there. That's a good back spring on that. And then when you shut it, as you push it close, it should close on its own. And you see that it does. So both of these knives function as they should. Um, Once again, I prefer the lighter action here, but that's really a preference, not you know, it works as it should. And so both these knives I'd say are equal, and there's no points assigned to in that test. So right now, both of these knives each have a point, and Schrade and Boker. So we go on to build quality. And so build quality to me is how they put the knife together. If they pin the scales, are the scales tight? Is the knife solid? You know, it doesn't flex, doesn't move. And these nail nicks are part of build quality to me, as well as the blades and the grinds on the blades. And so this knife has a simple blade geometry. It's a flat grind. So from the spine, it just narrows down to the edge, and there's no problems there. It has the original edge on it. You can see it's pretty good original edge. It has no swedges, so it's a very simple grind on there. You see that? There's no swedges on any of the blades. Very simple. And but there's nothing wrong with the build quality on this knife either, as far as the geometry is concerned. But when you look at this knife close here, you can see there's a huge gap between where the blade is sitting and the back of the back springs. It's almost yeah, I'd say it's almost 1/8 of an inch. It's pretty substantial. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and check the back ones, see if the back ones are better. And the back ones are a little better, but you can see it's still really, really deep there. And you can see how unsightly that is. And that's a hit on the build quality of this knife. They should be even with the back springs. And so the build quality on that is a little less than it should be. The other thing is this insignia plate is glued in. So if you open the knife up and you look in here, you can see whether it's pinned or not, and it's not pinned. And so that's not the best way to put that in a knife. I'm not going to hit this knife for the button pins, because it's a valid way to put a knife together. I just don't like it. So if we look at the build quality on this Schrade Walden, by the way, it's not a Schrade, it's a Schrade Walden. If we look at the quality on this, you have a much more complex blade geometry here. You have a flat here, you have a saber grind right there, and then you also have swedges cut into the blade at an opposite angle. And if you look at that, even though this knife is pretty old, it was made in 1953, it's very consistent, the geometry of the flat there, as well as the consistency of the edge. And then if you look at the grind on the swedges, they're good also. Let's see if I can get that in good for you. Yeah, that's pretty good. And so the geometry on this knife is good, and the other blades are as well. If we open it up though, and you look, you see there's barely perceptible gap between the blade and the back spring, and you're talking about the transition there. See that? Much tighter than the Boker, and this is a better made knife. And if you look at the other one in the back, same thing. It's almost dead on in the back. See that? just very, very tight. And so also the shield on this, I don't know whether you'll pick it up, but it is pinned. And so it's just the shield is put on better also. So in this test, the Schrade wins and the Boker loses. So the Boker has 2 points now. And then I'm going to move on to finish quality. And so when you look at finish quality on these knives, they're both pretty good. And so finish quality, I would look at, is the knife mirror polished? I believe this knife was probably mirror polished. I have other Bokers, and they're highly shined on the etching side. You see it has an etch still visible there. Tree brand Soligen, and the model number 280 right there. And so I just haven't cleaned this up yet. And so I think this was mirror polished. If you look down in here, it's kind of dirty and there's a little rust damage there. But you could tell it was smoothed out. It's not gouged. You could see that in the light. And it was mirror polished. And if you look down into the throat of the knife, let's see if I can get it in here. If you look down into the throat of the knife, there you go. Need light in there. You can see right there. It has some rust issues, but you can tell that that's cleaned up. And so I believe it was cleaned up in mirror polish. So the finish is pretty good on the surfaces of the knife. The transitions were pretty good all the way around, other than these button pins, but I'm not going to hold that against the knife. And then on the back here, it's adequate, and so pretty good finish quality on this knife. On this knife, it's the same thing. All the transitions are good on the knife. It's actually better. You look at the top square, that is mirror polished. That's not the case on that Boker, and looks pretty good. You can see that right there. Pretty good looking knife. And so I'm going to say the finish quality on the knives are equal. Pretty much. I don't see any problems with either one of them. If I had cleaned that Boker up, it would look as shiny as this knife here. So that's a tie right there. So what that gives us is the Boker had 2 points, and Schrade had 1 point against it. And so I'm gonna say another thing about this knife. So if you look at these two knives, they're traditional whittlers, but you notice the Boker doesn't have a divider in the middle, and the Schrade does. That's really why the Schrade is wider, and maybe that's what Boker was thinking. So the lack of a divider on this knife, it's okay, right? It's perfectly fine to do that. Some knives have them and some knives don't. But what I find is when you don't have that and you open the blades up, you see that blade right there. What's happening is that blade is rubbing against the other steel blade. And I find that they're just a little rougher when you open them. And when you open a knife that has the liner, the divider in it, the carbon steel is hitting that brass, and that brass is acting like a bearing surface, and so they just tend to be a lot smoother. And so you don't have to have a divider on a opposite end knife, but I think they work better, and I just think it's a better way to build a knife is putting a divider in it, and that's just my opinion. So the surprising thing here, the Schrade wins. This Schrade Walden is a much better built knife than this Boker, and I know there's guys out there throwing things at their camera right now, the Boker fanboys. But that's just an objective truth. If you look at these knives and go item by item, this is a better built knife. And even though the Boker has better materials, it has nickel silver instead of brass pins, and it has genuine hardwood instead of prop wood. Overall, this is a better built knife by far than this Boker. This Boker is also probably built in the 70s. This knife dates to 1953. So that's what these comparisons will do for you. They'll really surprise you. I was surprised when I did a comparison of these two knives. I couldn't imagine that this Boker, Sologen Boker, this is not a Boker USA, would be outpaced by a Schrade Walden. But these Schrade Waldens were just well-made knives. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and kind of fun, I guess, and kind of silly. But if you did, I'd appreciate it. It'd help me out if you like it. And if you'd like to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. And remember, you'll know the truth. The truth will set you free. And I really appreciate you guys for watching.